My husband's family made me sign over my inheritance. My mother-in-law smiled warmly. It's just to protect the family business, she said. You're family now. Nobody questioned it. I didn't refuse. I did this. The next day, their perfect world started to crumble. We were celebrating our 5th wedding anniversary at their lake house, and I didn't know it then, but it was going to change everything. It was one of those gatherings the Carmichaels loved to orchestrate. The whole dynasty assembled. My mother-in-law, Patricia, with her careful smiles and designer dresses that cost more than my monthly salary, my father-in-law, Robert, counting investments over whiskey, discussing market trends like other families discussed weather, my husband David's brother Marcus with his wife Chelsea, and their twin boys who attended a private school that had a waiting list longer than some college applications, and various cousins who treated family dinners like board meetings, complete with unspoken agendas and power plays. They owned a chain of boutique hotels across 3 states, 7 properties in total, each one carefully curated to attract wealthy travelers who valued authenticity. Whatever that meant. Success was their religion, and they wore it like armor. Every conversation somehow circled back to occupancy rates, revenue per available room, expansion opportunities. Even their casual clothes had logos that whispered money. David and I had met in college back when life felt simpler. Back then, he was different, softer. He read poetry in coffee shops and talked about teaching literature to high school kids who needed someone to believe in them. He wore thrift store sweaters and made me mixtapes. But after graduation, the family reeled him in. The business needs you, they said. You're a Carmichael. You have a responsibility. And slowly, semester by semester, the boy who quoted Neruda became a man who quoted quarterly reports and checked his phone during dinner. My daughter Emma was 4. She had my dark curls and David's gray eyes, and she was the center of my universe. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every small victory, she was mine in a way nothing else had ever been. She'd been excited about the lake house for weeks. Will there be ducks, Mama? Can I feed them? Will they eat bread from my hand? Her joy was pure, uncomplicated, untouched by the undercurrents that ran through every Carmichael gathering. Everything mine used to be before I learned to read the room, to measure my words, to make myself smaller. The anniversary dinner was elaborate. Patricia had hired a chef who specialized in farm-to-table cuisine, which apparently meant tiny portions arranged like art. Crystal glasses caught candlelight. Expensive wine flowed freely. Laughter that sounded rehearsed echoed across the long table. The lake shimmered beyond the windows, peaceful and oblivious. Emma sat beside me, carefully eating her pasta, trying so hard to use her fork the right way, to not spill, to be good enough for these people who always seemed to be judging. Patricia stood to make a toast. She was elegant in that effortless way wealthy women achieve, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her jewelry understated but unmistakably expensive. To David and Claire, she said, her smile perfect, practiced. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of growth. And to think, Claire, when you first joined us, you had nothing. The table went silent. Not the shocked kind of silence, but the knowing kind. Like they'd all heard this before and agreed with it. Like it was a fact everyone accepted. I had grown up in a small town 2 hours from anywhere that mattered. My father was a mechanic. His hands were always stained with grease, his fingernails permanently darkened from years of crawling under engines. My mother cleaned houses. She scrubbed other people's toilets and folded other people's laundry and came home exhausted every night. They weren't wealthy. They didn't have investment portfolios or vacation homes or college funds. But they loved me fiercely, completely. They saved every penny they could. They sacrificed constantly, quietly, without ever making me feel like a burden. When my father died suddenly of a heart attack during my senior year of college, I was 21 and completely unprepared for a world without him. He collapsed in the garage, surrounded by the tools he'd collected over decades. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no final words, no chance to tell him one more time that I loved him. He left me everything they had. $40,000. His life insurance policy, their combined savings account, the proceeds from selling our small house with its creaky porch and the garden my mother had tended for years. It was all he had to give me, and it was everything. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, distilled into a number on a bank statement. David knew this story. He'd held me while I cried through the funeral, stood beside me at the grave, promised my mother he'd take care of me. And when we got married a year later, with a simple ceremony my mother could barely afford to attend, I believed him. I believed in us. I believed that love was enough. Nothing, Patricia repeated, still smiling, letting the word hang in the air. Just a sweet girl from nowhere. David laughed. Actually laughed. Like it was funny. Like my father's memory, his sacrifice, his entire life, was a punchline suitable for after-dinner entertainment. Emma tugged my sleeve, her small face confused and worried. "Mama, why is Grandma being mean?" I pulled her close, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, using her warmth to anchor myself. "Finish your juice, baby." But Patricia wasn't done. She never was. She turned to Marcus, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they're about to remind you of their generosity. "Remember when we had that cash flow problem back then? Robert and I were so worried about the expansion. The Portland property was perfect, but the timing was terrible. The banks were being difficult. And then David came through for us." My stomach dropped. Something in her tone, in the way Marcus grinned in response, set off alarms. Marcus raised his glass. "That loan saved the Portland property. Turned into our most profitable location. Best investment we ever made. Loan." The word hung in the air like smoke, choking me. "What loan?" I asked quietly, my voice barely audible over the sudden ringing in my ears. Patricia blinked at me, all innocence, as if surprised I didn't know. "Why, the money David invested, dear. From your inheritance. Didn't he tell you? I assumed you two had discussed it. You seemed so supportive of the family business." The room tilted. The candlelight blurred. I looked at David, really looked at him, and watched his face cycle through emotions. Pale, then red, then something like resignation. "Claire, it was for us. For our future. The business is family. We're building something here." "You told me it was in a savings account," I whispered, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "You said it was safe, untouchable, for Emma's education. You promised me." "It is safe," Robert cut in, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "It's in the business. Much better return than any savings account gathering dust. Your father's money is working for you now." "That's smart investing," I stood. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, loud enough to make Emma flinch, loud enough to shatter the carefully maintained atmosphere. "You took my father's money. You took everything he left me, everything he died working for, and you invested it without asking. Without even telling me?" David reached for my hand. I pulled away like he'd burned me. "Claire, be reasonable," Patricia said, her voice sticky sweet, the tone you'd use with a child throwing a tantrum. "It's not like we stole it. Your family. What's yours is ours. That's how family works. That's how we've built everything we have." "My father died to give me that money," I said, my voice shaking with rage I'd suppressed for 5 years. "He worked himself to death. 60-hour weeks, oil changes and brake jobs and transmission repairs. He ruined his back, his knees, his hands. And you spent it on a hotel? On marble lobbies and infinity pools and whatever else you needed to impress tourists?" Marcus shrugged, actually shrugged like it was nothing. "A very successful hotel. You should be thanking us. That $40,000 is probably worth twice that now in equity." That was it. That was the moment the thread snapped. The thread I'd been holding onto for 5 years, the one that kept me smiling through their condescension, nodding through their corrections, shrinking myself to fit their mold. I picked up Emma, who immediately wrapped her arms around my neck, grabbed my purse, and walked out. David called after me, his voice rising with something that might have been panic, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove us to a motel an hour away, one of those places with a flickering vacancy sign and paper-thin walls where you could hear the highway traffic all night. It cost $49. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the tension she couldn't name but had definitely felt, clutching her stuffed rabbit, the one my father had given her before he died. I sat in the dark, staring at my phone, doing the math in my head. 5 years. 5 years of smiling at their dinners, nodding at their advice, accepting their casual cruelty disguised as jokes. And the whole time, my father's money, his legacy, his final gift to me, had been feeding their empire. The next morning, I called the one person I had left, my mother. She'd moved into a small apartment after selling the house, working part-time at a grocery store, living quietly. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. The dinner, the revelation, the years of lies. When I finished, there was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, steady and familiar. Then she said, "Your father kept records. Every bank statement, every insurance document, every receipt. He was meticulous about that. Said you never know when you'll need proof. I have them all in the storage unit. He wanted you to have proof of where it all came from, how hard he worked for it. Proof." That word landed like a key in a lock, like a weapon I didn't know I'd been carrying. "Get them." "Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Get everything. Every piece of paper." She was silent for a moment. Then, "Are you going to fight them, Claire?" "Yes." "Good," she said quietly. "Your father would want you to fight." I hired a lawyer that afternoon. His name was Thomas Reed, a quiet man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for winning cases nobody thought he could win. He came recommended by a colleague at the medical office where I worked as a receptionist, answering phones and filing insurance claims and pretending I was grateful for the opportunity. I showed him the timeline. The marriage, the inheritance deposited into our joint account. David's sudden investment in his family's business without my signature, without my consent, without even a conversation. Thomas leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, studying the documents my mother had overnight shipped. Bank statements, transfer receipts, my father's life insurance policy with my name as the sole beneficiary. Everything organized, labeled. Proof of a man who'd prepared for death even though he'd only been 53. "Did you ever sign anything?" Thomas asked. "Any paperwork authorizing the transfer? Any documents about the business investment?" I shook my head. David had access to our joint account. I added him after we got married because that's what you do, right? You trust your husband. He moved the money himself. I didn't even know until last night. "That's embezzlement," Thomas said flatly. No emotion, just fact. Even between spouses, he needed your consent for something like this, especially if the funds were yours before marriage and clearly designated as separate property. This wasn't a joint decision. This was theft. But I had trusted him. I had loved him. I had believed that marriage meant sharing everything, being vulnerable, not keeping score. That's what they tell you love looks like. "What about the business?" I asked. "Can I get it back?" "The money, I mean." Thomas flipped through the documents my mother had sent, his expression darkening with each page. "We can file a civil suit, demand repayment with interest. If they refuse, and they probably will, we take them to court. The business made money off your father's $40,000. Significant money, from what you've told me about the Portland property. You're entitled to compensation. Full repayment at minimum, possibly more." I thought about Patricia's smile, David's laugh, Marcus's shrug, the casual way they'd dismissed my father's entire life as nothing. "Do it," I said. The lawsuit landed on their doorstep a week later. David showed up at the motel that night, frantic and furious. He banged on the door until I opened it, Emma hiding behind my legs, peeking out at her father like he was a stranger. Which I realized he was. "Claire, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, his face red, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Getting back what's mine. You can't sue my family. This is insane. This is vindictive. You're destroying everything we've built." "You stole from me," I said, my voice steady, calm in a way that seemed to enrage him further. "You took my father's money and gave it to them without asking. Without even telling me. That's theft. That's betrayal." That's our marriage summarized in one transaction. It was an investment. For us, for our family. That money is making money. You'd understand if you knew anything about business. I never saw a cent. Emma never saw a cent. Only your family did. Only they benefited. He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the narrow walkway outside the motel room. They'll fight this. You know they will. They'll bury you in legal fees. You can't afford this. Let them try. David's face twisted into something ugly, something I'd never seen before. Or maybe I had, and I'd just been too willing to excuse it. You're destroying our marriage. You're tearing our family apart. Is that what you want? To make Emma grow up in a broken home? You did that, I said quietly, and the truth of it settled between us like concrete. The day you chose them over me. The day you stole from me. The day you laughed when your mother called me nothing. He left. No apology, no promise to fix it, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just anger and the echo of his footsteps down the motel corridor, fading into the sound of highway traffic. The Carmichaels did fight. They hired a firm that cost more per hour than I made in a week, lawyers who wore suits that probably cost more than my car. They painted me as a gold digger, a woman who married into money and now wanted more, who was using her daughter as leverage, who was bitter about not being accepted into their world. They brought up my background. Small-town girl, parents with no education, father who died broke, mother who cleaned houses. They made it sound like marrying David had been a calculated move, like I'd hunted him down and trapped him. But Thomas was relentless. He was methodical and patient, and completely unmoved by their expensive lawyers and their aggressive tactics. He had the bank records. He had proof that the money was mine, transferred without my knowledge or consent. He had my mother's testimony. He had my father's life insurance policy. And he had the business records showing exactly how much the Portland property had profited in 5 years. Numbers didn't lie, and the numbers were devastating. 6 months into the battle, David served me with divorce papers. Patricia's lawyer delivered them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's moving on," she said. "You should too. This could all go away if you just dropped the lawsuit. Think about Emma." I signed the divorce papers without hesitation. By then, Emma and I had moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, old carpet that had seen better decades, a kitchen where the faucet dripped constantly no matter how many times I tried to fix it. But it was ours. No one there told me I was nothing. No one there laughed at my father's memory. No one there made me feel like I should be grateful for crumbs. Then the Carmichaels made their biggest mistake. They tried to paint me as an unfit mother. David filed for custody, claiming I was unstable, that I'd kidnapped Emma, that I was living in substandard conditions, that I was poisoning her against his family, that I was too emotional to make rational decisions. It was a move designed to break me, to force me to drop the lawsuit in exchange for keeping my daughter. They thought I'd crumble. They thought I'd choose Emma over the money. They didn't understand that fighting for the money was fighting for Emma. But I had learned something in those months. I had learned to document everything. I had learned to keep records, to take screenshots, to save every text message. Every text David sent. Every time he canceled visitation. Every missed call. Every broken promise. Every time he chose a business meeting over her birthday. I had it all, organized in folders, time-stamped and undeniable. And when the custody hearing came, Thomas laid it out like a surgeon performing a delicate operation. "Mr. Carmichael has seen his daughter twice in 6 months," Thomas said, his voice calm and factual. "He missed her 4th birthday. He forgot about Halloween. He hasn't paid $1 in temporary support. Meanwhile, Ms. Bennett has maintained stable employment, stable housing, and consistent care. She works full-time, attends every parent-teacher conference, takes Emma to the park every Sunday. The only instability in this child's life has come from the Carmichael family's attempts to use her as leverage. The judge's face said it all." She looked at David with something like disgust. David didn't just lose the custody battle, He lost credibility. He lost the moral high ground. He lost the narrative they'd been trying to construct. Then came the settlement talks. The Carmichaels didn't want to go to trial. Bad publicity, Thomas explained. A family business thrives on reputation, on the illusion of success and integrity. The last thing they wanted was a courtroom full of testimony about stolen inheritance money, about a grieving daughter exploited by her husband's family. They wanted this buried, forgotten, dismissed. They offered me $40,000, the original amount. No interest, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no apology. I refused. Thomas went back with a counteroffer. $75,000. The original sum plus 5 years of conservative investment returns, plus a public apology. They laughed, sent back $50,000 and no apology. Take it or leave it. We went to trial. The courtroom was nothing like TV dramas made it seem. It was beige and fluorescent and smelled like old wood and stale coffee. Patricia sat in the front row, her face a mask of controlled disdain, every inch the wounded mother-in-law. Robert whispered constantly to their lawyer, his face red with suppressed anger. David wouldn't look at me, kept his eyes fixed on the table like if he stared hard enough, this would all disappear. Thomas called my mother to the stand first. She was nervous, twisting her hands in her lap, wearing her best dress, the one she saved for church. But her voice was steady when she spoke. She talked about my father, how he'd worked double shifts when money was tight, how he'd saved every tax return, every bonus, every unexpected windfall, how he'd wanted me to have a better life than he'd had, opportunities he'd never gotten. He told me, she said, her voice breaking just slightly, that this money was Claire's freedom. He said she'd never have to depend on anyone. He said she'd never have to clean someone else's house or fix someone else's car. He wanted her to have choices. The Carmichael lawyer tried to dismantle her, tried to make her seem simple or biased. But Mrs. Bennett, your daughter willingly married into the Carmichael family. She benefited from their wealth, didn't she? The nice house, the vacations, the lifestyle. My mother's eyes hardened in a way I recognized, the look she got when someone underestimated her. My daughter worked full-time while her husband played businessman with her father's money. She paid for daycare. She bought Emma's clothes. She didn't benefit from anything except her own labor and her own sacrifice. Then Thomas put me on the stand. I told them everything. The anniversary dinner, the casual cruelty, the way they'd made me feel small and grateful while spending my inheritance like it was pocket change. I told them about Emma, about how I wanted her to grow up knowing her. Grandfather's sacrifice mattered, that his life meant something beyond funding someone else's dream. The Carmichael lawyer came at me hard, aggressive in a way that felt personal. Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that you're simply bitter about your divorce? That this lawsuit is revenge? That you're using the legal system to punish a family that welcomed you? No, I said quietly, looking directly at the jury. This lawsuit is about theft. If a stranger had taken $40,000 from my account without permission, you'd call it a crime. You'd expect prosecution. This is no different. The fact that we were married doesn't change the fundamental nature of what happened. He took something that wasn't his. He gave it away without asking. And they accepted it, knowing I'd never agreed. When the business records came out, the courtroom went silent. Thomas displayed them on a screen, projected large enough that everyone could see. The Portland property, the initial investment, the profits year by year, revenue, occupancy rates, market value increase. In 5 years, the property had generated over $200,000 in profit. The Carmichaels built their expansion on Ms. Bennett's father's money, Thomas said, letting that sink in. Money taken without consent. Money that should have been protected. Money that was promised to be safe. They turned a grieving daughter's inheritance into their profit margin. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict. The Carmichaels owed me $93,000. The original $40,000, plus investment returns calculated at a reasonable market rate, plus damages for emotional distress and breach of fiduciary duty. Patricia's face went white. Robert actually stood up, like he could argue with the jury, like his money and his anger meant anything here. David just stared at the table, defeated. But the judge wasn't done. She leaned forward, looking directly at the Carmichael family, her voice carrying the weight of authority. This court finds that Mr. David Carmichael acted in bad faith when he transferred funds without his wife's knowledge or consent. This was not a family investment. This was not a joint decision. This was theft disguised as marriage. And this, family's attempt to use custody as leverage was reprehensible. They paid. Not immediately, of course. They dragged it out as long as they could, filing appeals that went nowhere, trying to negotiate reductions, attempting to structure payments over decades. But 13 months after that anniversary dinner, after countless hearings and motions and delays, a check arrived. $93,000. I didn't frame it. I didn't celebrate. I just deposited it and started planning a future that was finally mine. Emma is 7 now. We live in a small house with a backyard. Not much, but it has a porch where we feed ducks in the mornings, just like she'd wanted. She's in a good school, one with art programs and field trips and teachers who know her name. Her college fund is untouchable, locked in an account only I control, managed by a financial advisor who explains everything in writing. She asks about her father sometimes. I tell her the truth, gently, age-appropriately, that families don't always work out, but that's okay. We're okay. I started taking night classes, business administration. Turns out I'm good with numbers, with planning, with seeing through corporate smoke screens. I'm building something, slowly, carefully, methodically, but it's mine. Every decision, every risk, every reward. Mine. David sends cards on her birthday. They're generic, store-bought, unsigned by anyone but him. Emma puts them in a drawer and forgets about them. The Carmichaels never reached out. No apology, no acknowledgement, no attempt at reconciliation. They simply erased us from their narrative, the way they always did with inconvenient truths, with people who didn't fit their story of success. My mother visits often. She brings flowers for the kitchen table and tells Emma stories about her grandfather. How he could fix any car, diagnose problems by sound alone. How he made her mother laugh with terrible puns. How he loved me more than anything in the world, would have given anything to see me happy. He'd be proud of you, she told me last Sunday, watching Emma chase butterflies in the yard, her laughter pure and unself-conscious. I hope so, I said. She squeezed my hand, her grip still strong despite the arthritis. He gave you freedom, Claire. You just had to fight for it. That's all he ever wanted, for you to be free. She was right. The money wasn't the point. It never was. It was about refusing to be erased. About teaching Emma that her worth isn't determined by other people's generosity or contempt. About knowing that when someone takes something that belongs to you, you're allowed to take it back. You're allowed to fight. You're allowed to demand what's yours. The Carmichaels still run their hotels, still host their gatherings, still tell their stories about success and family and legacy. The Portland property is still profitable, still featured in their marketing materials. But I'm not in those stories anymore. My name has been edited out, my contribution forgotten, my father's sacrifice reduced to nothing in their revised history. And I'm fine with that. Better than fine. Because here's what I learned, what my father knew and my mother understood and what I'm teaching Emma every day. Freedom isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim. My father knew that. He spent his life building mine, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, sacrifice by sacrifice. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure Emma knows hers is waiting for her too. Not as a gift, not as charity, but as a birthright earned by people who loved her before she was born. So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough?